Hi, the media mirror. The news lately feels heavier than ever. But every now and then, a story breaks through that seems different. When Taylor Swift joined Travis Kelce on New Heights, what stood out was not the celebrity gloss, but the way they spoke to and about one another. For 2 hours, they simply celebrated each other, offered support, and played the role of biggest fan. Such open admiration is rare in public life, and even rarer in celebrity culture. Their recent engagement announcement, coupled with that display of mutual admiration, was refreshing, healthy, and profoundly affirming of love. But stories like that are the exception. Most of our media reflects the opposite, which raises an important question. Does culture shape us, or do we shape culture? The truth is, it's both. We are mimetic creatures, influenced by what we see, yet we also shape the culture that in turn shapes us. That is the media mirror. And right now, too often, what reflects back is despair, cynicism, and division. Why negativity wins. Why has modern media become so negative? Part of the answer is biological. Human beings are wired to notice threats more than opportunities. Missing a fruit tree is an inconvenience. Missing a predator can be fatal. This is why negative headlines trigger adrenaline, dopamine, and attention. Layer on top of that the incentives of the attention economy. The business model is simple. Capture clicks. Outrage, scandal, and extreme positions cut through the noise better than nuance. We see a similar pattern in politics, where sound bites dominate and primaries reward extremes, not because they reflect what most people want, but because they spark attention in a crowded field. Negativity pays, so negativity compounds. But just because it works doesn't mean it's good. It corrodes trust and drives us further apart. The costs are immeasurable. Sometimes they erupt in acts of real violence, as we saw with the assassinations of activist Charlie Kirk and Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman, just to name a few. More often, thank God, the effects are subtle. Negativity acts like a hidden tax. In low-trust societies, every interaction requires more friction, legal paperwork piles up, and even simple relationships become weighed down by suspicion. David Brooks often comments that we have become over-politicized and under-moralized. That rings true to me. The Irish philosopher and statesman Edmund Burke talked about epistemological modesty, an awareness that reality is complex and our knowledge partial. I believe we need a lot more of that today. Media today often prefers reductionism. It flattens nuance into slogans, and that lack of humility deepens division. We need a wake-up call. Even those who dislike the current media dynamic often end up participating in it. You would think the turbulence of recent years would have been enough to shake us out of this pattern. Yet some argue that only a deeper crisis will create change. I pray they are wrong, and I choose optimism because I believe change is possible. Victimhood or agency. How does media amplify victimhood, and what impact does it have on agency? Too often it comes down to ideology. Much of today's media no longer reports facts so much as signals what is wrong with the world according to its own lens, leaving people more enraged than empowered. The focus is almost always on what to resist, not on what to create. Empathy and sympathy matters. They are essential to a healthy culture. But media should also cultivate agency, confidence, and the belief that individuals can shape their own future. That has always been the promise of the American dream. Today, too much of our media portrays America less as a dream to be pursued than as a nightmare to be endured. The danger is that such a narrative becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Criticism of past mistakes is necessary, but there is a difference between honest correction and corrosive self-loathing. When people believe nothing they do matters and that all decisions are made by distant others, in that moment their circle of control shrinks until they suffocate. It robs people of agency, replacing the belief, I can do something about this, with the resignation that nothing can change. They no longer see themselves as the makers, but the made. And that, according to one of my favorite quotes in The Politics of Hope by Jonathan Sachs, is the genesis of despair. Helping us to expand our circle of control is very much the reason for why I write these newsletters. So what are stories for? Again, as David Brooks recently observed, too much of our culture is drifting into nihilism. Citing sociologist James Davison Hunter, he writes, a nihilistic culture is defined by the drive to destroy, by the will to power. And that definition now describes the American nation. The deeper challenge, Brooks adds, is not just to inspire belief in particular ideas, but to restore belief in belief itself, the conviction that some things are true, beautiful, and good. So what kind of stories should we tell instead? To me, the answer is clear. Stories of hope and possibility. Sports is one example. At its best, it offers drama, struggle, and triumph without partisan baggage. This does not mean all content should be cheerful or sentimental. Life is filled with darkness, and honest stories must reflect that. The problem is that too much of our cultural output, from movies to journalism, lingers in darkness without resolution. If most of what we consume is bleak, it drains us instead of strengthening us. What we need is balance. Stories that confront human suffering, yet still point toward light. When I think about stories that have truly affected me, Good Will Hunting stands out. For me, it's one of the best examples of how a narrative can embrace darkness and still end in hope. That park bench scene between Robin Williams and Matt Damon always moves me to tears. Sean tells Will that he may have read about the Sistine Chapel, but he has never truly seen it because he doesn't know how it smells. That line says everything. Life cannot be lived at a distance. It has to be entered with all its pain and all its beauty. So who holds the pen? I've often described myself as a concerned optimist, a phrase I first used years ago in the foreword to Dana Zohar's Rewiring the Corporate Brain. That posture was shaped by two forces that have always lived side by side in me: unease and entrepreneurial hope. You see, growing up in Sweden with a social conscience of my Jewish roots and the loss of a chronically ill sister, I felt early the weight of repairing the world. At the same time, my entrepreneurial family taught me that impossible is nothing and that the best way to predict the future is to create it. Those twin influences left me convinced that business, culture, and media are not separate from society's solutions, but essential to them. Over the years, one lesson has become clear. Belief shapes reality. The placebo effect confirms that the mind alone can produce real physiological change, sometimes rivaling actual treatments. If it is that powerful in medicine, imagine how much our steady diet of cultural inputs from news to social media shapes who we become. Years ago, while working with the conductor Ben Zander, he told me something unforgettable. He said that if your students' eyes are not shining, then you have to ask yourself, who are you as a teacher? Who are you as a parent or leader? That line has stayed with me ever since. We are all more shapeable than we admit, which is why it is crucial to curate our intake carefully. Why not share content that makes people feel inspired? When I've pressed publishers and journalists about bringing more balance to the media landscape, they often admit the problem but insist it is not our job. But if it isn't theirs, then whose is it? Responsibility belongs to all of us, not only in what we consume, but in what we contribute. Whoever holds the pen, whether a journalist, producer, or creator, carries a duty for what gets released into the world. Today, much of our output feels careful, professionalized, and commercial. Media is too often driven by what generates emotional reactions more than what inspired, considered actions. Yet we know that culture matters more than possessions. Once our basic needs are met, it's not just money that determines outcomes, but the values and norms that shape how people live. I will never forget a conversation I once had with Shimon Peres after the assassination of his close friend Yitzhak Rabin. Over lunch in Stockholm, tears rolled down his cheeks as he spoke of the difficulty of pursuing peace. He said, "The experience of trying to create peace has not been a happy one, but it has the advantage of being the right one." Those words still gives me goosebumps. Many things in life are not easy or profitable, but they are still the right things to do. Do no harm. Journalism has long embraced its role as the fourth estate, a necessary check on power. That role remains essential, but we must also ask, who owns the job of calling forth possibility? If media becomes only a vehicle for outrage, scandal, and fear, society loses its footing. The old newsroom saying still applies: if it bleeds, it leads. But when everything bleeds, we risk bleeding out our collective hope. As Konstantin Kisin, co-founder of the Trigonometry podcast, has noted, the fall of legacy gatekeepers unleashed both creativity and chaos. Each of us is now our own gatekeeper, and what we amplify is what multiplies. The danger is trading one extreme for another, from the corruption of old institutions to the disorder of a media landscape with no standards at all. The media mirror is not neutral. It shapes not only what we know, but who we become. What we need is a renewed sense of responsibility to hold power accountable while also telling stories of progress, creativity, and resilience. Quiet victories, small acts of kindness, and everyday progress rarely make headlines. Yet without them, our mirror reflects only half the truth. There are signs of renewal. The free press experiments with broader voices. Substack makes space for long-form ideas. And even in entertainment, storytellers like Taylor Sheridan weave wisdom into compelling narratives. Imagine if journalists today took an oath to do no harm, to avoid fear-mongering, resist stereotypes, spark curiosity, feed humility, and show the humanity and complexity in others. How might that reshape the way news is produced and consumed? This is the invitation of the media mirror, to ask not only what stories we consume, but what culture we reinforce with every click, every share, and every word we put into the world. I would love to hear from you. Do you believe journalists should take more responsibility for shaping culture? And what is one story of progress or kindness you've seen lately that deserves more light? Please share them. We need them desperately. Thank you for engaging.